Good evening. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that promotes voter education and advocacy. I'm Annette Tucker Sutherland, chair of the Shaker Heights chapter of the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland. Welcome to our audience at Shaker Heights High School this evening, as well as our live stream audience. The League asked to join with Shaker Schools in tonight's program as part of our mission to share information and nurture community engagement. The schools are in the midst of an unprecedented set of renovations and transformative reconfigurations. While it is exciting to build for the future, getting there requires planning and some disruption. Tonight we have a panel of experts to describe that planning. Here to moderate the panel in our question and answer session is someone who has been Ohio State Chair of the League of Women Voters and who has extensive experience with school finance and ballot issues. Please welcome Linda Lally.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, here is how the evening is going to go. We are going to have a brief presentation from our panelists about the ongoing process, and then we will allow plenty of time for questions. Everyone may submit a question. We are hoping for active exchange here. So, housekeeping. Please write your questions. We have a volunteer passing around index cards, pencils if you need. Write your questions. Pass them to this aisle, and she will, or someone will collect them when done. If you are watching on live stream, we've had a little bit of a snafu with how to enter your questions, but if you go to Shaker Heights at lwvgreatercleveland.org, you can submit your questions there, and they will eventually make their way up to the podium. And we have had a number of questions already submitted in advance. In posing your questions, please keep in mind that this is an engagement that we want to be civil and constructive. Keep in mind that this is a space for learning, not debating, and that's a key tonight. We're not debating. This is not a space for finger pointing or using inflammatory language. And if you would, please speak from your own experience as opposed to generalizations, and that will help us move it along. One of the League volunteers will be aggregating similar questions to eliminate redundancy and aggregate on common topics so we can move this along and field as many questions as possible. We are going to try to conclude by 8:30. We will try to get to every question we can, but if we can't, this video will be posted on the school's YouTube channel, and I'll tell you at the end how to get there. And questions can continue to be submitted to Shaker Heights at lwvgreatercleveland.org. Okay. So, our panelists tonight. We have immediately to my left Superintendent David Gleiser. Sorry. And who's next? Then we have Dr. John Moore, the Director of Curriculum and Instruction. School Board President Laura Cover, and Shaker Schools Facility Advisory Committee member Lynn Lilly. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It is great to be here. A big thank you to the League, to Annette, to Linda for helping make this evening happen. And it's nice to see everybody in the audience and following at home. We're just going to go through a brief presentation. Some of this information may be new. Some of this information may be a refresher. But we just want to make sure everybody is starting on the same page, and then happy to open up the floor for questions and conversation. So just to start, if you have seen any of our presentations or slide decks in the past few months, you have probably seen a slide like this, which is just to acknowledge that the information that we are getting continues to change. The information that we're presenting today is as up to date as we have it. But as information evolves and changes, sometimes our plans do as well. So I want to acknowledge that some of the things you'll see are tentative this evening. So we included this slide. Some of the questions that we get revolve around what is happening to students at specific grade levels. I think as everybody here is familiar, we're in the process of starting to plan for the renovation and construction of and the modernization of our school buildings. We have accelerated the timeline a little bit, which means that the Woodbury School building will be closing at the end of this academic year. That means that current fourth grade students will be staying in their elementary buildings next year. So our elementary buildings will become K through 5 or pre-K through 5 elementary buildings. And our sixth grade, our rising sixth grade students, or our current fifth grade students, will be going to the middle school, and the middle school will become a 6 to 8 grade school site. That building or that site will be used as swing space while Woodbury is being renovated. So this slide behind me just gives you a sense of what is happening for students at specific grade levels over the coming years. You will see in the year 26-27 that what is happening with our buildings there remains to be determined. We will work with an architect and construction firm once they're hired, which will be in the not too distant future, to make sure that we're able to revise and refine our construction schedule and have a better idea of when Woodbury will reopen for students to go back into that building. We're not yet 100% sure of that date, so that's why it's not included here in this slide. So the timeline that you see now is related to all the different decisions that we have to make between now and the beginning of the school year. We know that there are a lot of details that have to be figured out. Some of those are maybe more logistical in nature. Where will students be learning, for example? What kinds of spaces and schedules will students be operating with? And some of those are more programmatic in nature, so there are curricular decisions that we have to make. This timeline highlights really key decision points that we have to make over the course of the next few months. I am excited to share that we remain on schedule with this timeline. So you'll see at the beginning of the timeline there is information, for example, related to school start and end times for next year. That's information that we have already announced. We also are, we've come to an agreement related to modular units and are in the process of planning for the installation of modular units at the middle school site. There are curricular decisions that we're in the process of making around the fifth grade model and other things that affect staffing, and we remain on schedule to have that information in a timely manner so that we can keep planning intentionally and strategically for next year. So we are in the process of looking for an architect and a construction firm. Those two firms are critical to continuing to move this project and this process forward. We have already released the request for qualifications for an architecture firm, and we are expected to release the request for qualifications for a construction firm tomorrow. The architecture firm we expect to be in place by the end of April, and the construction firm we expect to be in place by the end of May. As soon as those firms are on board, they will jump right into helping with the design process for Woodbury as well as our elementary schools for renovation purposes. The one thing I want to highlight here is that the process of getting to the RFQ was a very inclusive one. And we heard a lot of input and feedback from members of our Facilities Advisory Committee, for example. We are also working with a consultant who specializes in supplier diversity and other experts as it relates to making sure that this is a good process and one that reflects and is reflective of the values that we hold dear here in Shaker Heights. So you will see, if you look at the RFQ, you will see that there are things that are very specific to what we expect here in Shaker Heights around historic preservation, around sustainability, around equity and inclusion, because we know that's important for the firms that are going to be working with us. We know that's important that they prioritize as well. So I've alluded to this a little bit already, but just in terms of classroom learning spaces, we're in the process of solidifying the different learning spaces that our students will be using moving forward. That includes confirming and solidifying the spaces that our fifth graders will be using at the elementary buildings. It also includes the middle school site. We do expect that we will need modular classrooms. Those used to be maybe called trailers, or temporary learning spaces at the middle school site to accommodate the additional grade level at the middle school while Woodbury is being renovated. Just a couple of notes about those modular units. First of all, they have come a long way over the past few decades. They're air conditioned and heated. Some of our modular units will have plumbing, and they are very comfortable learning spaces. We often hear that folks who get to use the modular units maybe prefer those units to unrenovated or pre-renovated classroom spaces. We do expect to be using those modular units for quite some time because the middle school site will be used as swing space, not just for the 6th through 8th grades while Woodbury is being renovated, but also when the elementary school buildings are being renovated as well. So we expect that we may need this additional and temporary learning space for a little bit of time while that construction renovation is happening. We do have different people helping to plan for the modular or the learning spaces. We have folks at each school building helping to identify learning spaces. We also have a committee that's helping at the district level to help plan for the move that needs, or the moves that need to happen. As you can imagine, there are a lot of details that have to be figured out and worked through. We have been in Woodbury for about 100 years, so there's a lot of learning supplies, materials, papers that we need to move, store, or get rid of, and we're working on making sure all those details are worked out. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Moore, our Director of Curriculum and Instruction, to talk a little bit about the planning process and some of the curricular decisions that we have either already made or are in the process of making.
Thanks, Dr. Glasner. I'll start with sharing a little bit about the process by which we are coming to some of these decisions. And as Dr. Glasner alluded, I think one thing we've discovered is that the process is as important as the outcome or the product on a lot of the decisions that we're making here. And in that process, it's become and continues to be so clearly evident how inclusive this needs to be in regards to our faculty, in regards to our families. And so we've created a suite of several different committees, both at elementary and middle, to guide this work and really frame out what some of these decisions will look like. At the pre-K to 5 level, that's being led by our elementary principal, Renisha Campbell. She's brought together quite a diverse group of educators from all subject areas and grades, including those at Woodbury, to start to shape what some of this transition will look like as 5th grade moves into our elementary buildings. Similar approach to middle school, although middle school is currently undergoing the expansion to broaden out to further subcommittees around curriculum and instruction, cultural awareness or belonging, and so on and so forth, bringing more educators into the mix in that way. Now, to make sure that all of this work is being coordinated, we're actually working together multiple times a week to make sure that all of this progress is being calibrated between PK5 through our middle years program. So to be a part of this transition and to see the way that people are collaborating, really K-8 to navigate this, is inspiring, and it's working to help us make sure that this is a cohesive change, that any decision, for example, at elementary is a positive complementary decision for middle, and certainly vice versa. When I shared about how important it is that our teachers are an integral part of this, one thing that we heard, particularly from our 5th grade educators, was a need around professional learning. And while the Ohio academic learning standards are the same, you might think to yourself, well, 5th grade and 5th grade, how hard could it be? It is a change more than just settings or facilities. It's really a change in our approach to how we are educating on those standards. Currently at Woodbury, the young people cycle through the 4 content areas across their teachers, and the teachers do their best to make interdisciplinary connections, and yet they are the students experiencing 4 different core classes. By and large, at elementary, they have one teacher who's teaching all of those different subject areas in a very integrated, or what we call a transdisciplinary way. And so that challenged our group to think about, well, we believe in this transdisciplinary model of elementary education, but we also believe in supporting our teachers. What kind of transitional plan might we make? Here's where we landed, with about 90% support from our Woodbury 5th grade teachers to stay, temporarily at least, in a departmentalized fashion where our current or some of our current Woodbury teachers who may be very experienced teaching ELA will continue to teach ELA in the 5th grade in the elementary setting. One of the key differences, however, is that those teachers in 5th grade in their elementary setting will collaborate each week so that while they might be individually responsible for a subject area, through that deep collaboration, they are drawing the same integral connections that our K-4 teachers have been expertly doing for years. We went in that direction, again, because of the feedback from teachers. To me, that's good evidence that makes sure that we're listening to our teachers and we're accommodating their needs. A few decisions that we are making or have made and communicated. We are shifting school start and end times at elementary and middle. What that's going to allow us to do is begin our elementary schools a little bit earlier. That is feedback from our elementary teachers who currently get out around 4 o'clock, that it was far too late for some of our young people. It was good feedback for us to make a change. That's going to allow our middle years learners to get to school a little bit later, which is well recognized in the research. That's going to help us make that happen. And those middle schoolers will be out around 3:30, 3:45. That's still going to give them some time for extracurriculars and activities, athletics, etc. in the afternoon. I shared a little bit as an example our 5th grade model and how we've strived to make that an inclusive process. Here's another case. The capstone experience for our elementary programs is the IB Primary Years Program, or PYP exhibition. And that exhibition experience really serves as a capstone for our elementary learners, where they take all that they've gleaned from PK through 4th, or now 5th grade, and get to pursue an inquiry project of their own design with their friends, with the guidance of a mentor. It's really a treat to experience. That exhibition project is designed to be the capstone, and in working with our teachers, our IB coordinators, we even reached out to the IB organization to get a little guidance on what this transition might look like. And ultimately, it was decided that, as intended, we will do exhibition in the 5th grade year. And in the interim, for our current 4th grade teachers and students, they'll be doing still a celebration of their learning this year, a capstone, if you will. But that's only going to serve to better prepare them for the exhibition next. We're currently having deep conversations about music programming. At Woodbury, currently in 5th grade and in 6th, young people play an instrument every other day throughout the year. And we really challenged ourselves to think about, well, what might that look like once 5th grade goes to elementary? Here's where we are today with guidance from our teachers. And we've also been in talks with our community members through the band boosters, et cetera. We think we're going to be able to do some degree of instrumentation at the elementary years through some rotational exposure. Our teachers felt that that was really important so that by the time the young people get to 6th, they are ready to go and engage in the instrumental learning, which is so vitally important to our community. Thanks really to our teachers who are in the process of developing a plan on how we can accomplish that. There are still barriers to overcome, but we're working in the right direction. Finally, curricularly at elementary, currently young people at our elementary schools get Spanish education for about 25 minutes a week. We have heard from our Spanish teachers for years a concern around what we might call diminishing returns. They'd say, John, we believe in this program, we value this program, and at 30 minutes a week or 20 minutes a week, it's just not having the impact that we seek, and our children are yearning for more. That really put us on a journey here to think about how we might better integrate that into our student special schedule. We're meeting with specials teachers next week to really define what that could look like.
Okay, so the other piece we wanted to share tonight is around the financing and what's been updated since maybe the last time we've talked about financing, which was during the campaign. Likely you, actually even before I start, I feel like there should have been another slide once again saying, remember, everything in here is the plans and they are subject to change, because even though I'm about to share where we are today, there's continued chances that things are going to keep adjusting as we move forward with the facilities project. But the first bullet point won't change, and it's something that you probably remember us saying quite a bit, is that the OFCC is giving us a 37% match to do a large chunk of the work that we're going to be doing in all of our buildings. What is different, though, is that we thought going into this work that we would be able to tranche the bonds multiple times as we needed money. So, which just means it's, one, I'm trying to show off my knowledge of the word tranche. And also, it was that as we needed money, we could go and issue our bonds. That turns out to not be correct. We need basically $102 million. On the resolution we sent that we voted on previously, it actually is up to $105 million, which we'll find out when we go to sell the bonds. But we know that we need our part of the match in the bank before we can start anything. So this isn't just we need that money to start having the actual shovels in the ground, but actually even to hire an architect, we needed that money in the bank. So the next slide is going to be how we have then figured out how do we finance it. Because even though we can't do the bond tranches, we can still step how we're going to do our taxes to community members, and we felt like that was incredibly important given what we talked about quite a bit during the actual campaign. So, again, estimated will be in bright red on lots of slides. But you can see what our original estimated schedule was at the top, and then you can see what our new estimated schedule is. A few things I want to point out in here. One is that up through 2026, so up until 27, right now we believe that there won't be anything different between what we thought it was going to be and what it will be. The differences start in 27, so we thought we would have a year where we weren't going to need to issue additional taxes. It does look like we're probably going to have to issue the equivalent of about $80 per 100K starting in 27. The overall numbers don't change. It's just how quickly we need to come to request the money, and 37 years later, how quickly we'll be able to end the use of your money for these for this debt. I think the other thing I would like to just note, all of this is based on assumptions. Assumptions on assessed market value, assumptions on what we're going to be able to, what kind of interest rates we'll get when we go out to sell the bonds, which will be coming up very shortly. And what you're seeing here is a very conservative estimate. This is basically like we wanted to sort of walk through what is the most conservative so that hopefully if we have to come back again, it won't be news that is unsettling, but actually happy news. And a few other things to just take note. One is that because we are issuing these bonds earlier, it means we're going to have a chunk of money sitting in the bank, which can gather interest. It's money that has to be used for construction, but we know, as in all construction projects, there's things that can happen as we go through the construction process itself, and so that will give us a little bit of extra cushion and or money that we can use for the high school when we get to that point. We do know that the actual millage is going to be lower than what you're seeing because our assessed values will go up. So for those of you that are paying attention more to millage than to dollars, those numbers will actually go down as assessed value goes up. And then we know that this is also an estimated bond schedule. So there's still part of the bond that we'll be issuing probably next year at this point. But as we continue to figure out how quickly we can move, some of those things might change as well.
This
You
is
wanna take it?
Sure. This last slide, I think, reflects some of the things you've probably already heard. Communication engagement is a key part of this process. You've heard already that we are making sure to include a great deal of input and feedback from a wide variety of groups in this process. Dr. Moore spoke a few minutes ago about some of the internal stakeholder groups that are providing input in this process. We also are working very closely with external stakeholder groups. I would like to acknowledge Lynn Lilly and our Facilities Advisory Committee, which is made up of a broadly representative group of community stakeholders who are walking with the district side by side in this process and providing a great deal of input and feedback, sharing information, sharing questions, asking questions, And that has been a really valuable part of this process. We also regularly talk to our union leadership and other stakeholders within and across the district. That is not going to stop, and I expect will likely continue even beyond the transition planning that we're doing right now. We also have regular opportunities for community members to get updates, to ask questions. We have regular webinars that we do. Our next webinar is going to be next Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken, on February 28th. Also, if you haven't checked out our facilities page, it is newly updated. It's very easy to get to off of our website, shaker.org. And you can click on our facilities page, and there are frequently asked questions and other information there. And we regularly send out weekly updates about the progress we're making as it relates to facilities plan. If you aren't already getting those weekly updates, I certainly encourage you to sign up, and you can do so through our website. And this session, this evening, is one example of many that we are doing to really make sure we're getting to engage all parts of our community. I think we're ready for questions, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's the last slide.
All right,
So,
thank you.
thank you.
Good, speedy coverage of some very complex issues. All right, let's start with an area that most Shaker residents take great pride in, student achievement. So during this construction upheaval, what are the measures that are being taken to ensure that our key performance indicators that have been outlined in the strategic plan are still going to be met?
Sure. The first thing that comes to mind with that question for me is the work we're doing around our school improvement plans. Our school improvement plans, or SIPs as they're affectionately called, are methods of setting goals and tracking progress on the key performance indicators that are driven by building leadership teams. And so while we're experiencing some of this transition, I would say, as a district, and we have to be attentive to the needs of our staff and students, I think, through that transition, I think really the SIP is what grounds us in the daily work of the teaching and learning to make sure that our students stay on track with our academic achievement goals. I would just say, in my perspective, the key performance indicators in and of themselves are part of the answer to your question. Having a North Star, having a shared set of goals or vision for our student outcomes in and of itself is tremendously helpful to add stability through this transition from my perspective.
Another thing I would add, I would agree, Dr. Moore, with everything you shared. One of the things we've heard is for rising fifth grade students, for our current fourth grade students, being able to stay in elementary buildings for an additional year provides some opportunities related to support that they may not get when they transition to Woodbury. So an example of this would be some of the literacy supports that we typically provide in our elementary buildings. Look a little different than the literacy support or the reading support that students get in older grade levels. Because students are staying in fifth grade with teachers and administrators and other student support professionals that they largely already know, and with some of those strong literacy support structures already in place, we expect that our fifth graders may get some additional support in the area of academic achievement that maybe they wouldn't have gotten when they transitioned to Woodbury. So that's something else that we're keeping in mind. I would also say we're generally using this transition as an opportunity to look at our academic programming across grade levels to find areas where we can provide some additional opportunities for students, whether that's at the younger grade levels or at the older grade levels.
The only thing I want to add, you I think helped me give words to this. This really is providing us an opportunity for curricular cohesion. Our young people experience so many transitions now. In this process, we actually have a great opportunity to really connect learning and teaching K-5, PK-5 in some cases, and then 6, 8 up. That, I think, is actually going to tremendously help us with achievement as well.
And that was, I mean, I have memories of the very beginning of Forward Together, that visioning session. That was one of the big things that came up out of that conversation was the transitions were hard on our students and our families, and also that we imagine that there's lots of opportunities for teachers to get to know students for longer and for kids to feel more comfortable in buildings, which should all have an impact on student achievement.
I'd say too that the facilities committee members, a lot of us, not me anymore, but a lot of us have children in the schools and have those kinds of concerns, and all of us hear them. And it was something that we brought to the forefront as well, and especially that 5th grade transition back to elementary schools. And we were pretty tough. I personally had I'm a volunteer at Lomond Elementary, and I have my kids I love, and so we really wanted to make sure that that was going to be handled well, and are convinced that they're well on the way. There may be some bumps in the road, but they're well on their way.
You know, math, I'm thinking about math. I know this is the first question, so we probably have to move on to other questions, but it made me think a little bit about math. And right now, our K-4 students experience the Bridges math curriculum, which we spent a lot of time planning for and implementing that curriculum. We've had some modifications with our 5th grade students because of the way the secondary schedule works as compared to the elementary schedule. So moving forward, 5th grade students will also have an opportunity to experience that Bridges curriculum.
right.
So that's a good example of the kind of cohesion that you were referencing.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you. So you understandably spent a lot of time talking about the rising 5th graders. They're going to be seeing the most upheaval soonest. But down the road, the elementary buildings will each be renovated. Are there other vulnerable groups? How are you determining other vulnerable groups? What, if anything, at this point, are your plans to address their needs?
One example that comes to mind is something, even through our staffing conversations as recently as this week, is being very attentive to our students with exceptional needs or special education needs. And sometimes those young people experience transitions differently. That's why we have things like transition days during the summer, so on and so forth. And so that's something that I know our Director of Exceptional Children is being very attentive to, particularly with our behaviorally focused classrooms and any experiences or transitions that they may have. So there are, I would say, populations to which you speak that as a team we're thinking very hard about how do we make this transition healthy, productive, safe for each of our children.
Two things I would add. We have students who participate in our extended standards classrooms, or students who have more intensive needs. We have been very focused on making sure that we are providing both the right settings and the right level of staffing for students who may be going now to the middle school, for example, a year early than they originally would have. So that's one example. Another example of students who may need additional support, we are looking at our staffing for our elementary buildings, knowing that we're going to have an additional grade level at our elementary buildings, and wanting to make sure that we have the appropriate level of student supports in place at our elementary buildings. We think that this is probably an opportunity to provide a little more consistency across elementary buildings. Right now we have school counselors in some of our elementary buildings for different amounts of time. We have social workers in our elementary buildings and other kinds of student support professionals. We want to make sure that we're providing a good amount of social and emotional supports for students in our elementary buildings.
Thank you, thank you. And what about future enrollment projections? How are they playing into, is that a challenge, or have you already considered it?
The future enrollment projections were a big part of the planning process. We work with an organization that does these kinds of enrollment analyses regularly for school districts. It certainly informed our plans, and we are planning to design spaces that take future enrollment into account. That said, we also know how important it is to be flexible in our planning, so we do expect that our buildings will have some degree of flexibility as enrollment may vary over time moving forward. But certainly, the enrollment projections we've received and have looked at were a critical part of the planning process.
I know also when we talked to other districts that had done this work in the past, they did see some enrollment bumps. We know that by adding an expanded pre-K, there's more of a pipeline coming in. So I think one of the things that we had to get a waiver for was the OFCC makes some assumptions about how many kids you will have in your building. We knew we wanted smaller class sizes than what the OFCC assumptions were, and we also knew that we wanted that flexibility if enrollment does shift.
Great, great. So how are you communicating all these changes to the children and their families? And more importantly, how are they reacting to what feedback are you getting?
I don't mind starting with, but Lynn, I don't know if you want to share some of the things that we've talked about, either the Facilities Advisory Committee or that you've experienced, and then I'm happy to add on both in terms of what we're doing and how folks are reacting.
Well, as you said, there are the weekly newsletter updates that anybody watching should sign up for. There are webinars now about every 2 weeks of updates. There are presentations at the PTO. There are presentations like tonight. And if you go to the website, I think part of what the advisory committee is doing is realizing that we're supposed to be listening to the community as much as we're using our own expertise, architecture, communications, whatever. And so we're trying to be a funnel for that as well, a two-way to share information, get concerns, but there is a space on the website that says, tell us what's on your mind. And you just click the button and anyone can ask a question and expect an answer. And hopefully it will be an answer we all like. But I will tell you that I think also part of what the advisory committee, we are, there are overlapping circles, the teachers, the band boosters, all of these committees, and we are just one offering a different point of view, and I think there's a good deal of overlap. But I think maybe perhaps it feels like on our shoulders, the 32 of us, is to push a little harder, that we can keep coming back and saying, are you still on schedule? Is there still money put aside for this? That anybody can do, but there are 32 of us that they invited, so now they have to listen to us. So, and we're, I should say that the first night that we met and started setting down some of our goals, and then they asked if any of us had a question, and a hand went up and said, do you want something from us, or are we just a rubber stamp? And there were heads nodded around the room. And I can tell you that they assured us that we're not, and I can assure them that we're not a rubber stamp, that we're there to speak for our communities and our own expertise.
So if I can, feedback. Great job pushing out information. What are you hearing back? What is the tenor so far?
In terms of the feedback we get, obviously it depends on the different groups that we're talking to. I would kind of highlight something Lynn said, these kind of different groups of people. It could be maybe teachers have a different perspective than some families, then we meet with our finance and audit committee, our PTO, and so getting a variety, a diversity of feedback throughout this process has been really helpful and will remain very helpful. I think the feedback that I hear most often, people are excited about the future, about the fact that our students will, in the not too distant future, have access to modern, comfortable, safe school buildings, and the sooner we can get there, the better. And people maybe sometimes don't do well with uncertainty and the unknown and the not knowing. And so the more details, I think often the feedback I get is related to wanting to have more information or more details and wanting to be assured that those details are being well thought out. I think generally we heard through the campaign that, there's a lot of support for where we're headed, and it's how we get there that's going to be very important. So that's some of the feedback I'm hearing. I don't know what other folks are hearing.
I guess I would add that, suddenly it was from a plan for all these schools finishing in 2031 to what are we doing about Woodbury? There were, there was a crush, and it was all hands on deck. And if any of you have talked to anybody in the grocery store or go on Facebook, watch anything, there was a lot of concern in the beginning. I think what we're hearing is people are calmer, the teachers. Information is the key, that the more we can tell people, and as part of that, all the things we're doing already, and I think the district is considering a podcast. The Facilities Advisory Committee is thinking about doing a series of podcasts about information, using some of the experts on our group or other experts to also help people understand what's going on in more ways.
But you mentioned the teachers. Let's move on to the faculty and staff. So when you think about what our teachers, our staff have been asked to face, there was the Fernway fire, then there was, I guess COVID was next, then there was the detracking, and now we're having the construction upheaval. Are we burning out our people? Are we asking too much of them? What measures are you taking to support them throughout this new challenge?
I'd love to start on this one. Connecting with the previous question and linking it with this one, I think one thing that we've seen or heard from our teachers is the importance of going quickly on some of these decisions and then informing them, but not so quickly that we can't be inclusive. And so what I mean by that is we want to make the best decisions possible, and as Dr. Glasner alluded to before, what's really weighing on a lot of the teachers as they share it is that ambiguity. It is that real question of, I've made peace with this change, but which building am I going to be in? And I think as we go about addressing some of that ambiguity, and we plan to, we're getting staffing messages out at March 1st or so. One thing that I'm really proud of is that when we put this, the survey out to hear where people were, what they wanted, their preferences as far as grade, building, subject area, position, et cetera, we have really committed to and have honored much of those requests. And while not everybody might get their top 3, I wanted Mercer, ELA, 4th grade, in many cases we have been able to meet 1 to 2 to 3 of those preferences. And in that regard, while I think this has been a difficult, for some, transition, making sure that we get voices and making sure then that we follow up on the promise of getting those voices gives me hope for how this transition can occur. That being said, I think it's still a stressful situation. Many of the teachers in our talks, and we've got a series of professional learning days lined up for some of this discussion, our teachers are at the point where they want to say, I'm ready for this, but I'm going to need more XYZ resources, and this is the kind of collaborative time I'm going to need. They're going into planning and action mode. I'm seeing that transition, and I think the next domino to fall really is that staffing communication around early March.
If I could just add, Linda, you're right. Our teachers have been dealing with a lot over the past couple of years, our staff as well. We're very fortunate. We have, I really believe, the best of the best here in Shaker Heights. And I think, John alluded to the challenges that come with ambiguity. It's that unknowing, the not knowing that I hear from teachers wanting to know, where am I going to be? Can I get started with planning? What are the spaces that I'm going to be teaching in? Who are my colleagues going to be? It's why we're so committed to keeping that schedule that I shared earlier on this evening, because we want to be able to get information out so that we can provide support, collaborative time, so we can start building teams and familiarity. The only other thing I would add, the other questions I get most from teachers and staff is related to moving. How many boxes will I get? When will I get my boxes? What do I have to keep? What do I have to store? What do I get to move? What do I have to throw out? Those are really important questions. When will I have time to pack? Those kinds of things. We are in the process of putting together both a professional learning and support plan and also a packing and moving plan for those reasons, because we know how important it is to get those details so that teachers can really focus and our staff can really focus on preparing for students in the fall.
And I think that the most compelling thing for the board as we were thinking about whether we accelerate or not was this question of how long can people live in ambiguity, and what does that do to their psyche, and what does it do to both families and teachers and staff? I mean, I think that was a big question, and it was something that we realized that a whole bunch of questions can't be answered until you know who's retiring and who's going to be here the following year. And so they were going to have to sit in that ambiguity for another full year, and that felt like way too much to ask of our staff. Also, the thing that I'll note is Dr. Glasner had shown which grades are the most impacted, and in terms of like what we're hearing from community and teachers, the original question. And Not surprisingly, we were hearing the most from kids that will, well, the kids not quite as much, although they had some opinions as well, but the students and families that will be in 5th grade next year and 6th grade next year, and teachers that were teaching in Woodbury. And we expect that as we continue to move through the facilities project, we'll hear lots of questions and concerns from the first round of K-5 families and teachers that will be, where their schools are gonna be, they're gonna be working on. And again, I think this model of being as transparent as possible, getting as much input as possible, and then making decisions in a realistic and responsible way, but quickly, I think is something that I think we learned from this first part.
If I could add just one more thing, we've talked about feedback from different groups that we've gotten. We have not talked as much about feedback we've gotten from students. We had the opportunity to go visit Woodbury a couple of weeks ago, and we heard from current 5th grade students, rising 6th grade students. So these are students who are definitely impacted by this accelerated timeline. They had the opportunity to survey all of their classmates. So all current 5th graders had the opportunity to complete the survey and share some feedback about kind of what are their hopes and fears and questions. The thing that that really stuck out to me was what they really want to make sure we have in the future is the kinds of community building that they experience now at Woodbury. They were very adamant, and it was kind of universal that they want to continue at Woodbury. I think they call them the Ubuntu celebrations, that they want to continue having the opportunity to build that kind of community when they move to 6th grade. So that was another piece of feedback that was really helpful to hear.
Yeah, thank you. So you mentioned the survey that has gone out to, I believe, everybody. And you've mentioned other feedback that you've had. Are there measures in place to make sure you're hearing from everybody? Those quiet people that are in the background, are you reaching them? Do they feel they are being heard? And in worst case scenario, are we looking at a major turnover in the future?
So I think, there's always challenges with hearing from our most marginalized voices, more or less by definition, whether those are internal stakeholders or external stakeholders. We have been very intentional about making sure that we have opportunities for those voices to be shared, those ideas to be shared. Whether that includes our Facilities Advisory Committee, where we were very intentional about being broadly representative, whether that's by neighborhood, by race, by age, by folks who were more supportive of the facilities plan or folks who were less supportive of the facilities plan. That is one way that we've made sure to be representative in the feedback we're getting. In terms of staff, there are many formal ways for staff to provide input, whether that's surveys or different. I've gone to every building other than the high school. I think I'm planning to be here next week, if I'm not mistaken, to hear from staff. There are also opportunities for staff to share feedback in their department teams, in their grade level teams, with their union representatives, if they feel less comfortable kind of being a voice in a more open space. In terms of community members, our board is certainly very representative of our community and also engaging with all of our different PTOs in neighborhoods with community members. I think what we have learned is two things. One, we have to be able to rely on multiple modes of communication and engagement to get to as many people as possible, and that one person or a small group of people can't do it alone. It really does require many different people to provide and facilitate two-way communication and engagement so that we do hear from a wide variety of people.
Yeah, and I do think, and there's always more that we can be doing. So if there are ideas out there and people think there's other ways that we can be engaging in that two-way conversation, we are definitely up for those recommendations.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's move on to the property tax situation. So first, let's make sure we're all clear. The bond issuance is the source of the funds that will be used in construction. The property taxes are the vehicle to repay the bonds. And the bonds are being issued much sooner, in total, much sooner than expected, right?
Yep.
But the property taxes are being accelerated on a slower basis and won't start until 2027, based on everything we know right now.
Well, they'll still start
They'll
as
still
they were, but
start
they won't
as
shift
explained,
until.
yeah, as expected. But 2027 will be the first impact we feel about the change in the taxes. So what else is out there? What other uncertainties could there be? What measures are we taking to make sure we don't have other big miscommunications, misunderstandings? We're working with a lot of outside people. How are we making sure we're all on the same wavelength?
So it is a great question, and I will say, first of all, as much as we are doing everything possible to avoid pitfalls, mistakes, miscommunications in a project of this scale and scope, we expect that some of that will happen naturally and unfortunately, and we want to be prepared proactively to make sure those are few and far between, but also when they do happen that we're prepared to respond and address those issues. We are working with lots of experts who have gone through this before. That includes the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission. It includes different, legal counsel and others who have gone through this process before. We also have structures in place to regularly check in, whether that's with, I'll use Ludlow as an example. We haven't talked a whole lot about Ludlow, but as I think many of you are aware, we're in the process of we're starting the renovation process for Ludlow earlier than our other buildings. We have regular check-ins with our architecture firm, with our construction firm, that's GPD and Gilbane, as well as with others who are involved in the process to make sure that we are where we said we were, where we were going to be, or that the plans are proceeding accordingly. Those structures are really important, and they are taking place for the master facilities plan as well. As we get an architect and construction firm on board, that will, we will have those similar kinds of structures. I think that's where I would start. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like you just zoomed into my 3 a.m. wake up every single night, Linda, when I'm like, what else might happen? I think it is actually very unlikely that we could come up with all of the things that might happen. And I think what we can commit to is what we actually did in this situation. So we found out that we were going to have to issue most of the bonds very, very quickly, which then led to many hours of conversations coming up with, so then how do we finance this logistically? How do we keep as aligned as possible to what we said to voters when we were at the campaign place, and come up with an answer that we think is a strong answer, and also be really transparent. Like, as we talked about, we could have avoided this conversation until 27 because that's when people were going to see something different, and that felt like, why would we do that, right? We want to make sure that people have full information as soon as we know it and we have something that we can share. And so I would say, while we can't commit to never getting anything else wrong, I think we can commit to how do we handle the challenges when they come up.
You use the word transparency, and Laura, I know I've heard you say this before, that transparency can be messy. And it is also a value that we believe strongly in, and I know that we hear from our Facilities Advisory Committee and others how valuable it is for our community. That does come with the caveat that we sometimes may share information that either is incorrect at the time or changes, but we think it's important to provide information when we have it to our community so that they can really be kept abreast. So our community can be kept abreast of where we are in the planning process.
And there is, in terms of learnings and things that we that will now, as we continue on, I mean, one of the things that I thought a lot about as someone that was very actively in the campaign, all of our printed materials had lots of caveats next to it, right? They maybe didn't have a full slide of everything in here might change, but they all had caveats. I will say, as somebody that was out and about a lot, talking about it, I definitely did not use the caveats nearly enough. And I think in terms of one of those lessons learned as we start to think about the rest of this next project is, we need to take responsibility for when we're messing up, and I do absolutely take responsibility for that. And we're going to be much more careful about how we communicate on things that we know might change.
All right, so I think everybody appreciates how quickly and effectively you did respond, the whole group responded to a major disruption in the plan. I don't think it's necessary for us to throw anyone under the bus at this point, but I think we do need a little more explanation on what we are doing to avoid it. You've given us a lot of generalities, and I think specifics would help. Are you hiring different advisors? Are you taking more advice from other sources? Can you address any kind of specifics like that that might help allay some of the mistrust that has been created in the community?
Yeah, I mean, we'll start with sort of some of the whys the mistakes happened, and we know the whys because we didn't move forward with coming up with a solution until we understood why this happened in the first place. One, this is the largest facilities project that we have done in Shaker, so this was sort of new to everybody that's sort of in the Shaker space. This was a pretty new set of facts, and I think because of that, we didn't always know the right questions to ask. So I think that's part of it. The other piece that we found was, this is also the first time we've done this sort of project with the OFCC, or at least the first time since OFCC has this set of rules. And so what that means is we had a bond that we had $30 million that we did tranche. We did the bond tranches in that situation. And so we were sort of under the impression that we could still do that without actually appreciating where the OFCC rules came into it. And then finally, the OFCC usually moves faster. So like the projects the OFCC is helping with are usually ones that are just a couple, 2 to 3 years. And so those communities don't even think about this idea about tranching. So they didn't know to come to us to say, just be careful if you're thinking about this. So there was like all of these places where I don't think there was no one was trying to mislead anybody, but I do think there was a number of places where either we didn't know the questions to ask or they didn't know to be telling us. So some of the things that have shifted, so that group is now meeting on a very regular basis with OFCC in it.
Which group is
Okay, so
that?
it's bond counsel. It's basically the lawyers that are part of the bond, the folks that are actually going to issue the bonds for us that are called something else. And then we also have a advisor, a municipal advisor that is in that group. And the board is now more involved in those conversations as well as additional people from the district. So that's one piece that we're seeing that we feel more confident in. We're also, this part of it we're about to be done with, right? So the actual, this first round of financing and the biggest round of financing, this we're about to finish up. And we've certainly had lots of concerns about what kind of advising we were getting and did we not get all the advice we could get. And we should also just be clear that there is a cost to changing relationships a month before we're about to go out for the bonds too. And I don't know what's even reasonable to expect that anyone would have had all of the information that we needed at the moment. So that's the case for that. In terms of some of these other questions that'll happen with facilities, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we're learning from Ludlow that we're going to be able to use with the other buildings. It's every sort of time we're going through this, we are now learning more things to make so that we don't end up with more surprises as we go.
Okay. Thank you. Lynn, this is, I believe, going to be your chance to shine. But I'm bridging because it's somewhat related. Anyone who has ever been involved in a major construction project knows how much can go wrong, how rapidly it can go wrong, and the potential for another set of misunderstandings. Is this the role of the Facilities Advisory Committee? Where is the vehicle to help in the construction
Sure.
uncertainties?
I don't think, well, the way the Facilities Committee was chosen, as I understand it, was people put their names in. Half of them were chosen randomly from people who submitted, and half were appointed based so that there would be a geographic, economic balance, so that we would be trying to hear from all voices, have somebody representing all voices. In that group, there are architects who, by the way, did look over the RFQ before it went out and offered some ideas. I do believe there are some finance people, but I think this was way down the road before we got in place. And so I would say not yet. But also one of the things that the advisory committee is talking about is the formation now that we have gotten organized, gotten our feet under us about Woodbury, is should we be breaking down into subgroups of people with special skills, architects, finance people, communications people, or by topic area, equity, sustainable design, those kinds of things, so that we can be available. But I don't think there's any plan for our group to become, bond specialists and providing that kind.
The only thing I would add, you mentioned communications. There are folks in the Facilities Advisory Committee and elsewhere who specialize in communications, who have expertise in communications, and who have already proven valuable in providing input and feedback and thinking through how we can communicate, how we engage with our community when things are going well and when we have miscommunication or other missteps to share or talk through with our community. So that's a piece that has been very helpful with the Facilities Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Can you expand a little more on the structure of the committee? How long are these people serving for? Who do they report to? You mentioned, Lynn, early on, do we have teeth here or?
I'll start and you.
Sure.
When we were invited to join, we were asked to be committed through December of this year. And after that, I think, given that this is a long project, there may be some turnover either by choice of the people or what have you, and that a similar process would be in place. I don't know that we report to anybody. I think built into that question is, does the school board have to take our advice? Going back to something I said earlier, we are, one circle in the Venn diagram of overlapping people. We are advisors. We are not, the board makes decisions, the, administration, but we think we're in a place to offer good advice and put pressure on from the community around us. Does that answer everything?
Some. I'll get to the rest.
Well,
Are the meetings open to the public, or is there a way, are there minutes that are distributed?
So a couple things I would add. The meetings are not open to the public. They are meant for the Facilities Advisory Committee. We do not currently share minutes publicly. That's something that we can look into, at least sharing generally speaking kind of some of the topics that we talk through. Two things that, one thing I've learned in recent history and one thing I've learned maybe more broadly, the Facilities Advisory Committee meets monthly. And we found out very quickly that the facilities plan is not going to operate around the schedule of the Facilities Advisory Committee meetings. And so we have put in place structures to make sure that we have more ongoing communication with the Facilities Advisory Committee because things happen quickly and we want to make sure that we have ongoing communication when things happen quickly. Secondly, I think you asked earlier kind of some of the things that we've learned over the course of this process. The value of having a group like the Facilities Advisory Committee be a part of this process. If I could do it all over again, I would have liked to have had a committee like the Facilities Advisory Committee. And in addition to some of the other stakeholder groups we have in place much earlier, I think their feedback and insight has been very helpful.
Is this group covering the Ludlow construction, or is that separate?
Good question. Not directly. We do talk a little bit about Ludlow, the Ludlow construction. The Ludlow school building is not technically part of the OFCC Master Facilities Plan. It's being funded differently, and we're a little bit ahead of the rest of the Master Facilities Plan with Ludlow. We have been working closely with the Ludlow Community Association and pre-K teachers and faculty and staff. As relates to Ludlow. I imagine there may be some conversations that come up related to Ludlow as that process continues to evolve, but it hasn't been as much of a direct focus for the Facilities Advisory Committee.
And where is the intersection point between the advice coming out of the Facilities Advisory Committee and the other stakeholder groups, the Finance and Audit Committee, the internal teachers, structures, other groups?
I mean, I think Lynn was talking about how there's a lot of crossover through all of these committees. So we have someone who sits on F&A, Finance and Audit also sits on the Facilities Committee. We have 2 board representatives that sit on the Facilities Committee. We have teachers that are sitting on the Facilities Advisory Committee.
PTO leaders. We have PTO leaders on
Yeah.
the advisory committee.
Yeah, so there's sort of like the hope for some natural places where communication is moving through, and also folks to be able to flag if something's getting lost between those groups.
Okay, all right, thank you. Let's move on to recreation and sports and the upheaval we're facing. How is the construction going to affect, or do you know at this point how the construction is going to affect not only school sports but community recreation?
I'll start. Some we know, some we don't know. So I guess in terms of specifics, I'll actually start with Ludlow in this case. One of the things that we heard a lot from the Ludlow Community Association and the Ludlow community in general, as well as working with the city recreation department, is the importance of the green space that already exists at Ludlow. There's a softball field and a soccer field that is used regularly. There's also the playground there. So the site plans that we've come up with for Ludlow keep those spaces intact, which is great. I believe they will largely be able to be used while Ludlow is under renovation, which is also a positive. And that's something that we're still working on, so that may change, but at this point, hopefully there will be minimal disruption to those spaces. The other spaces that come to mind as it relates to upcoming renovations and construction, the pool at Woodbury, gym space at Woodbury, the fields, the field in front of Woodbury and the field between Woodbury and Onaway, are all spaces that will be disrupted during the renovation process. We are working that. It has an impact on school athletics as well as recreation programming. We are working closely with our athletic department and our recreation department and folks involved in student or youth swimming and community and adult swimming to develop alternate plans for those spaces and those programs. We're still in the process of it. It is something that is very important and certainly on our radar, but we don't yet know exactly which group or which program or which team is going to go where or when. We do work very closely with the recreation department and the city and the library in general through the Forward Together process. They have been very close partners. We have decided to keep the Woodbury building open through the summer, partly in response to the programming that the recreation department runs at Woodbury over the course of the summer, and to allow a little bit more time for some of that planning to take place. So, and a few other things to add.
Well, Lynn was just reminding me that we're talking other communities to see if we can use their their pool spaces, their field spaces as we need them as well. The other thing I'll just say is all of these stakeholder groups also have parents with kids that are using these different fields and pools, et cetera. So, we know this is something that there's a lot of folks that have a lot of concerns about. They want to make sure that we figure this out. And we continue to sit on Forward Together with the city and recreation, thinking about how this can work together. There's a recreation committee. So there's sort of a number of avenues to be getting feedback and thinking about what we can do during the construction and then after as well.
So if anyone listened to the presentation you made to City Council on earlier this week, there were some concerns voiced about this process. And so I'm wondering, there is a recreation working group that has been the mover of the group, I don't know how else to describe it, is one of the city council people. I'm wondering, do you feel that's the proper group to be working these issues out, or is there another vehicle or process that you feel is better for addressing the challenges?
I think the recreation working group is one of the vehicles for addressing the challenges or the questions that we face in the long term, and I would definitely underscore and emphasize, I know the city is in the process of completing a recreation study, which we believe will be very valuable in helping inform future recreation plans. Some of that will come through the recreation working group, and we typically have district staff part of those working group meetings. I know we also want to make sure some of our athletic administrators participate in those meetings as well. We also have a lot of collaboration, communication, and meetings that happen outside of that working group. For example, actually, when we think about pool space, we've been working very closely with the recreation department to think of ways we can expand the access to district pools over the past couple of months, and we have been able to do so as a result. We've been talking with the recreation department about use of our gyms for pickleball space, and that is also something that has been born out of conversations that may not be coming out of the recreation working group, or maybe the nuts and bolts of the planning maybe not is happening in the recreation working group, but is happening behind the scenes. So those are some examples. I think really to do this well, we're gonna need to be kind of working together on through multiple avenues.
Okay. And who is responsible for communicating these decisions when they happen? Is that coming out of the school system? Is that coming out of the city recreation as a broader entity?
I really think it's all of us. Actually, our communications teams have joined our Forward Together meetings over the past few months, specifically for that, because of that question. Who is responsible for communicating? I think to do it well, it really does need to be all of us. You may see, for example, if you read our weekly board packets that we share with the board every week, that we've recently started adding information about those Forward Together meetings. That's partly as a result of communications folks starting to be more present at those meetings and thinking through how can we make sure the community is hearing what we're talking about.
I had a conversation with Sean Malone and asked were there minutes or recaps, and he said they were going to start being posted to Forward Together.
Yeah.
Great. All right. I have some specific questions, and I want to assure the people who have written these that I am getting to them, but I'm going to do one more broad topic, and that's Ludlow and the preschool program. What can you tell us about it? How is it going?
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is I'm just going to put a plug in for the board meeting next Tuesday, because we'll be talking, we have a board work session on Tuesday the 27th, and the topic for the meeting is pre-K planning. So I can give we can certainly give brief information here, but if you want to learn a lot more, come spend 2 hours with us starting at 5 o'clock on Tuesday.
It's an
Maybe less,
exciting
maybe
commercial.
less. The planning is going well. I will say, kind of divide into two categories. First, just really making sure we're strengthening our current pre-K program. We've done a lot of work to ensure. We just had a state inspection. They do an unannounced inspection once a year. That happened a couple weeks ago. We received very positive feedback. We want to make sure we have a very strong program right now. We are also doing a lot of planning as we think ahead a year and a half towards the expanded program at Ludlow. I talked a little bit about the site planning that's happening at the external part of the building. There's also a lot of design planning that's happening for the internal part of the building. We're also in the process of making sure that we are recruiting and sharing the message about the expanded pre-K program to our entire community, and putting in place other structures to make sure that it is a successful, representative, inclusive pre-K program. I'll leave it at that. If anybody wants to share more specifics here, I know Dr. Moore, Laura, you have other information if you want to share. But again, Tuesday, the 27th, 5 o'clock, we'll be talking more about it.
I will ask one follow-up question to that. Are you seeing increased interest in the program, or is it too soon for that kind of a reaction?
Yes and no. It's a little too soon for a year and a half from now. We have more enrollment in our pre-K program at this point this year than we did at this point last year. We're expecting to have more enrollment in our pre-K program at this point next year than we do this year. So we are seeing increased interest. We have had some people who are asking us, when will Ludlow open, or express interest in the expanded pre-K program. Not a whole lot yet, but we expect more to follow soon.
Okay, thank you. All right. Going back to the specifics of the renovation plans, so can you review what is the schedule for renovating the, well, I think that means elementary buildings. And are you planning to use the same architects and construction managers that you are going to be hiring for the middle school's building, or the Woodbury renovation, or or is it too soon to know?
So in terms of the construction schedule, we do not yet have a final construction schedule. We shared, and I don't have the slide in front of me, but we did share a very preliminary construction schedule a couple of months ago that the OFCC helped to develop. We expect Woodbury Woodbury will be vacated this fall. We then expect Woodbury to open possibly at some point in the 26-27 school year. After that, we will start working on renovating elementary buildings. Elementary buildings will be renovated 2 at a time. While those buildings are being renovated, those students will go to the middle school for swing space. We do not yet know the order of the elementary buildings. That's something that an architecture firm especially, and maybe a construction firm, will help us determine. In terms of when all this will be over, sometime around 2030, and again, I don't have that slide in front of me, so I can't remember the exact date. We've talked a lot about how things might go wrong in this process. We know that once we start opening up walls in our buildings, there may be some surprises that we find. So we are hopeful that we'll be able to stay on the construction schedule that we published, but we know that surprises may come up. The other thing I will say, so we're in the process of looking for an architect and a construction firm for the rest of the master facilities plan, aside from Ludlow. We do expect the RFQ that we are publishing, the request for qualification that we're publishing, does look for one firm or at least a team to provide, the services all together, and it is for the whole project. So that's what we're expecting right now. It may end up being multiple firms who are working together as a team. That's not unusual in these kinds of projects, but they will be working on this project from start to finish of segment 1.
All right, and then speaking of the architect, so if the architect is retained by May 1st, how quickly can detailed drawings and designs be done for the Woodbury building, and how much time will be allowed for stakeholder review of those designs?
Great question. That was, again, at least preliminarily drawn out. If I remember correctly, it's around 14 to 16 months of the design process. We expect that stakeholder input and feedback in that process is going to be critical. That includes, and we're seeing this at Ludlow, we saw this at Fernway, teachers, faculty, and staff especially, and students giving input and feedback, particularly on the inside of the building, community members giving input partly for the inside of the building, but also for the outside of the building. So that it will definitely be a part of the process. The only thing I would add here is that it is possible that we will ask the architect to come up with I can't remember the technical term, it may be called an early bid package related to demolition and pre-renovation work, so like asbestos abatement, things that can be done before we actually start doing the renovation process, because Woodbury is going to be vacant next year, we can get a bit of a jump on some of those things that will help prepare the building for the renovation work that will be happening. So that's something that may happen a little sooner than the full design of the building.
I think that goes towards addressing part of the next question. On the surface, it has seemed rushed, the process, now that we're accelerating. Are there other factors that are making this a proper process, enough time for due consideration?
I've answered a lot of questions recently, so if anybody else wants to jump in, I'm happy to.
Okay, let me throw in something I know. Bring in what the OFCC has already done on this process, because I think that's part of the answer.
What the OFCC has already done in terms of like thinking through how long it's going to take us to do each of these parts. Yeah, so they did a preliminary of what they think this next round of work is going to be. I think one of the things they said from our original planning was we might need less time in some of the planning pieces and some more time in some of the building pieces, depending on sort of the timing of the year. And so that's something that I know that we were really conscious of as we were thinking about acceleration was, does this acceleration help us get to the beginning of a school year? Because apparently, and this makes a lot of sense as I now understand it, it's pretty easy to move kids and teachers and staff back into a new building in the middle of the year. It is not that easy to move them into the not new building. And so those are all considerations they looked at. I know part of why, one of the reasons that we were excited or thought like if there's a possibility of doing the acceleration in a responsible way is that it gives us more wiggle room as we continue on the project. So if planning does end up taking longer, or if more likely construction takes longer than what we originally estimated, we have a little bit more room to kind of breathe in there.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. You know, it feels rushed now. We know that if everything goes perfectly according to plan, we're still looking at least about 7 years of renovation and construction work. And so anything we can do to keep the process moving forward in a timely manner, we think is important to take advantage of.
A commercial for running for the board.
All related to that, if the if the construction manager is in place by June 1st, that's the deadline? Okay. How quickly then does the subcontracting process follow?
They need to have their subcontractors as part of the RFQ, right?
Yes, I believe so, and we have lots of people who are going to be helping with that process who work with construction firms more frequently than I do. One of the things that having a construction firm on board allows us to do is to generate what's called a guaranteed maximum price. So we're going through that with the Ludlow process now. So we have an architecture firm on board. They help develop the design for the building. Then they work very closely with the construction firm to really make sure that with the subcontractors in place, with all the details, materials identified and all those things, you know, essentially how much will this cost, knowing that we're operating within a budget as defined kind of by the bond issuance, by the OCC contribution. So that is something that we expect having a construction firm on board will help us do. We're living that process right now with the Ludlow School Building.
Question on communications. I know you mentioned it earlier, but it's worth repeating. If someone has questions that have not been addressed in any of the venues that are out there, how do they get their question answered?
Call Lynn, Lily, or members of the Facilities Advisory Committee.
I was actually going to raise my hand. First of all of these people have email addresses. If you have kids in the schools, talk to their teachers, talk to their principals. The facilities committee, all of our contact information is on the website, and that was purposeful. I'll be here afterwards if anybody wants to talk. These guys will.
And then the website, right?
Absolutely, the website. Go to the PTO meetings. I'm going to go to more PTO meetings this year than I did when I had 3 kids in the school. I'm going to, fifth grade, rising fifth graders, rising sixth graders, rising seventh graders. The security committee meeting on, not committee meeting, community, high school security, because I think part of just my job as a resident, but all of our jobs is to know what's going on everywhere, so everything affects everything.
The only other thing I would add is we do have regular webinars every other week. Those are opportunities to hear information, but also to ask questions and share ideas or thoughts. So February 28th, I think at noon, if I'm not mistaken, is the next one. And that information is also on the facilities page.
And what about for those people who don't want quite as much detail? I mean, there is a plethora of information out there. Is there a more summarized version of the process?
The website is probably where I would direct people who kind of want to look through information on their own time and kind of looking at information that might be important to them. It's pretty organized, the website, so you can check it out, kind of the different parts that you might be interested in. We work with the city, Shaker Life magazine, and those kinds of channels to also provide regular updates that may not be quite as detailed as, let's say, our weekly facilities updates, but that do provide information to the community.
Well, we are closing in on our finishing time, and I have run out of questions. Is there anything anyone on the panel would care to bring up that hasn't been addressed?
I think the only thing that's sort of on my mind in terms of this idea of like getting the communication is also that all of those same places are places to be giving feedback to. So if you're seeing things that feel off or you're not sure about them, I feel like this is like something you'll hear in classrooms all the time. Like if you have that question, somebody else probably has that question too. I think that's true on the feedback side as well. And so I think taking advantage of the group on the facilities advisory group, the board, district staff, like you should continue to send stuff our way. It is really helpful in terms of us continuing to make decisions as we move forward.
Two other things I'd like to add. First of all, a big thank you to the league. Linda, thank you very much for helping moderate this, for asking good questions. And also, we're very excited about this process. I know there's a lot of transitions that may be coming, but we're excited about where we're headed. And this is going to shape students and teachers and community members' experiences in our schools for generations to come. And it's exciting to be embarking on this process.
Well, thank you to the panel. We know how many hours you are going to be spending away from your families, so we appreciate very much your commitment to this. And thank you also to the audience, both here and live stream, and the people that will watch the video in the future. We greatly appreciate the questions and your caring for the community. So details. Tonight's video session will be posted on the school's YouTube channel. You can find it easily by accessing YouTube and then simply searching Shaker Heights Schools, and it should come up. And if you are not a league member and you are intrigued by this and want to be involved, if you found this interesting, consider joining the league, please. Membership information is always available. You can find us on lwvgreatercleveland.org under the Shaker chapter. And if you have not yet signed the anti-gerrymandering petition, we have some here that you can sign. I want to close with a nice little reminiscence of a fellow baby boomer league member. And she wrote, in second grade in Fairfax, Virginia, my classroom was a, quote, cozy aqua-colored trailer out behind our school building. I loved it, and it made me and my classmates feel very special. It never occurred to us that the trailer was just the way our district was responding to a crush of baby boomers. We just went with it. This memory reminded me that children will respond positively if change is presented as an adventure. Shaker parents can trust our kids' resilience. The children might even feel special for having helped make their school buildings better. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.